Hey folks, welcome back to Integrative Psychonautics. Hope you're doing well out there. In today's video, we're going to be discussing what I thought was a really interesting question that I got in the comments section a little while back, which is it invalid to be guided into a mystical experience, right? So if you have someone show you how to have a mystical experience, is that somehow less meaningful, less valid, less real than if you say take psychedelics and kind of automatically or spontaneously have one on your own? I want to share my thoughts about this. I have plenty to say about it. And this is really the beginning of a pivot here on the channel back into talking about psychedelics and mystical experiences, in particular with psychedelics, over this next little while, because I'm about to drop, spoiler alert, a course here on how to use psychedelics for mystical experiences. So I want to share all my thoughts about this, and we're going to start talking about it more because it's a very important thing to understand more clearly and kind of give proper nuance to. So without further ado, if this interests you, please join me. Okay, so let's go ahead and just dive into it here. And I'm just going to kind of riff a little bit off the top of my head and kind of unpack some of my thoughts here and explore this question, which I think is a really good, sincerely, a very good question and really a valid thing to be asking. And I'd love to just kind of give my own view on this. Of course, this is just one opinion, one perspective, of course, grounded in a lot of time, a lot of hours logged in mystical experiences and a pretty serious pursuit of that. So it's been at some point in my life, very much at the center of my value system and what I found important in life. So, there's bias here, of course. So take that with a grain of salt. But I just want to kind of, share my thoughts on this since someone asked. So, from my point of view, mystical experiences are so interesting in that they are something it seems human beings have the capacity for, largely speaking. I'm sure there are exceptions and people who can't get there. But broadly speaking, it seems to be a capacity we have as human beings that is, by all accounts, generally the most profound, meaningful, deep, vivid, real, reality shattering, in the best sense of the term, experience we could possibly have, right? For most people, if you've had a mystical experience, generally the understanding is there is nothing more meaningful than that, more deep than that, more profound than that. And so we have this capacity for this deep, profound, meaningful type of experience. But one of the tricky things about mystical experiences is that it's often a very subtle shift in how you're using your attention, where you're placing your attention, how you're processing the information you're experiencing, that kind of opens up the portal and the door to a mystical experience in the first place. So back to this question, right? Is it invalid if someone teaches you how to do that, right? Is it only valid if you discover this way of seeing and opening on your own, right? For me, I guess the short answer here is personally, I don't think it's invalid. I think it's highly valid. And I'd like to kind of back up why for you guys. So first thought here is that, we have these very ancient spiritual traditions from all over the world, most of which are rooted in some form of mystical experience, right? And sets of practices and rituals and approaches and ways to work with ourselves to have that kind of state and experience, because generally speaking, that's universally recognized around the world to be a sacred experience, right? But we have these long-standing traditions that have already mapped out how to get there in great detail, including all the kind of nuances and the ways we can make mistakes, and what to do if you end up in this kind of a state versus that kind of a state, and what kind of practices you need to do this, that, and the other. There's so much tradition there, and in that tradition, A, we already have the knowledge. B, there's beauty and continuity with ancient humanity that we can directly touch and access today through these traditions. So there's a beauty there. And there's also, it's been figured out, right? And to not use that or not listen to that, I think is kind of silly, right? In the same way that if you think about any tradition, right? that people had to rediscover how to meditate every time, every day, every year, into the future. If we like throw out all the meditation knowledge that's been accrued throughout the millennia in human history, and people had to start over, how many people would effectively properly meditate, right? How many of them would actually get it just right and discover it on their own organically without being prompted? And this kind of like, I think, opens up in a whole other deep conversation of, how much of what would you know if you had never acquired the concepts to understand the things you understand, right? Like, how much of what we know is built on concepts that were already pre-established and made for us, right? What if we had to come up with words and concepts and descriptions for all the things in our world fresh from scratch every time, right? Or you can think of any system of knowledge, right? Whether we're talking the sciences, whether we're talking the arts, whether we're talking architecture, whether we're talking blah 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 blah. All these systems of knowledge are built on foundations of histories of knowledge, right? And that is part of what gives us the ability to get up to speed quickly these days and use that knowledge rather than discover that knowledge and spend our entire time just trying to figure out what it is that we're seeing or understanding or asking or looking for, right? I think the same thing applies with mystical experiences. It is a knowable thing. It is an achievable thing. It is a doable thing. There are maps and techniques and ways of getting there. Mystical experiences, I think it's really important to understand, because some of us, discover mystical experiences through psychedelics, and, maybe even accidentally by taking too large of a dose, and oopsie, I had an out of body, transpersonal all one experience, right? That's probably how it goes down a good chunk of the time. And then there can be this feeling of significance there and importance there, and almost a feeling of like stealing fire from the gods a little bit. And I think we see a lot of this in the psychedelic community, where people really feel like, this is unique to psychedelics. And I think it's really important to remind you and remind everyone here that it's not. That mystical experiences are, again, an integral core part of being a human being that reaches way back in history, whether we are talking through fasting, whether we're talking through dancing, rituals like the Sundance ritual in the Native American community, where we're using piercings and suspension and that kind of a thing, whether we're talking, sure, plants and, plant medicines to get you there, or breath techniques, or something as simple as Zen meditation, which literally could be sitting on a pillow, facing the wall, staring at the wall for hours and hours and hours, right? So there are so many ways to get to a mystical experience. And yet the experience is more or less commonly understood to be the same kind of experience, and described very much in the same way cross-culturally across time, right? So there's a lot of anecdata, shall we say, that kind of supports that this is a universal experience, that we are more or less, talking about the same thing and touching the same thing. And so I think it's worth having a toolkit there to know how to get there. For me, I'll personalize this a little bit. After having my first mystical experience, it was absolutely life-changing and game-changing. And I'll be doing a video about that story soon. So you guys will get to hear more about the specifics of that in my personal case. But once I knew that was a possibility and that was there, and I knew how that felt, and I knew how to use my attention and what to do to kind of open that doorway into mystical experience, I found that it was easier to get there meditating. I found that it was easier to get there on lower doses of psychedelics. So I no longer had to like super dose myself to have that kind of experience. I knew how to open up to it on a much more moderate dose. And it really became an integral part of fueling and understanding of what became my spiritual practices and my spiritual life, because I had a real direct reference experience that I could go back to over and over and over. So there's a whole other value here with knowing how to have a mystical experience that isn't just about, the validity of discovering it for yourself or being guided there, right? But there's also a value there in that once you know how, then this becomes not just, wow, somehow I ended up with the most profound experience and I don't even know what happened. It becomes, oh, I know how to get myself there again. And this now becomes a life skill, a life practice that that has value across the board in my life, across time, across contexts that I use for different things. There's a lot more I could say about this, but I'm looking at the ticker on the video here, and we're already about 10 minutes deep. So I'm gonna kind of wrap it up because I realize I'm kind of riffing and waffling. But long story short, I was gonna just kind of summarize here. No, I don't think it's invalid. I think it's incredibly valid to be guided. I think there's a lot of utility in being guided there, including knowing how to then do it for yourself afterwards. I think there's great value in these wisdom traditions that have already figured that out. And I think to integrate that into our life is incredibly helpful. And, we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we want to do something. I don't have to rediscover carpentry if I wanted to build a shed in my backyard, so to speak. There's already blueprints and all the tools and all, pre-cut lumber. I don't have to go cut trees down. In other words, I do think it's important to have first principles thinking and to really impact knowledge for yourself and to gain real practical skills with whatever it is in life. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with being taught how to do something. And I would argue probably we wouldn't even be talking about mystical experiences. We probably wouldn't have the internet, probably wouldn't have a lot of things if we had to reinvent everything every time someone wanted to do it from scratch. So that's my thoughts on the topic for now. Let me know what you guys think about this. Is this useful? Is this valuable? Is this entertaining? Leave a comment down below, thumbs up, like, subscribe, all that stuff. As you know, probably by now, I'm terrible in terms of pushing my channel to grow. I'm very much focused on the content, focused on the connection with you, focused on the work here more than being a YouTuber, whatever the hell that means. And so if you could help me grow the channel though, to reach more people, it's really appreciated. Anyways, that's it for now. More content on the way soon. Much love to you all. Take care.